Let's begin with a truth that is both simple and deeply uncomfortable. Not every relationship is meant to last forever. We grow up absorbing the idea that if something ends, it must have failed. That if a relationship doesn't stand the test of time, then something went wrong, someone didn't try hard enough, didn't love enough, didn't hold on tightly enough. But that belief is worth challenging. Because what if some relationships are not designed to endure indefinitely? What if their purpose is not permanence, but impact? Think about how much a person can change over time. Your values evolve, your priorities shift, your sense of identity becomes more defined. The things you once tolerated, you begin to question. The things you once needed, you may outgrow. Growth, by its very nature, creates distance not just between who you were and who you are becoming, but sometimes between you and the people who knew you in that earlier version of yourself. And this is where the tension begins. We often try to preserve relationships based on history rather than alignment. We say, but we've known each other for so long, as if time itself is a sufficient reason to continue. We confuse familiarity with compatibility, but history doesn't guarantee harmony. Just because someone has been part of your past doesn't automatically mean they belong in your future. This doesn't make the relationship meaningless. In fact, it's often the opposite. Some relationships are incredibly meaningful precisely because of the role they played during a specific chapter of your life. They supported you, shaped you, challenged you, or even broke you in ways that forced you to rebuild stronger. Their value is not diminished by their ending. It's completed by it. There's a psychological tendency to equate endings with rejection. When a relationship fades or dissolves, we internalize it. We wonder what we did wrong. We search for a flaw and mistake, a moment we could have handled differently. But not every ending is a result of failure. Sometimes it's simply the natural outcome of two people moving in different directions. And that's difficult to accept because it removes the illusion of control. If something ended because of a mistake, then in theory, we could have prevented it. But if it ended because growth created divergence, because two people are no longer aligned in values, energy, or purpose, then there may have been nothing to fix, only something to acknowledge, and acknowledging that requires a different kind of courage. It requires you to sit with the discomfort of letting go, not because something is broken, but because something has run its course. It requires you to release the idea that longevity is the ultimate measure of success in a relationship. Instead, you begin to ask a different question. Did this relationship contribute to who I am becoming? If the answer is yes, then it served its purpose. We also have to consider the cost of holding on beyond that point. When you stay in a relationship that no longer aligns with who you are, there's often a quiet erosion that takes place. You start to compromise parts of yourself, not in the healthy, mutual way that relationships sometimes require, but in a way that feels diminishing. You shrink your voice, suppress your needs, or ignore your intuition just to maintain the connection. And over time, that creates a kind of internal dissonance. You feel it even if you can't fully articulate it. A sense that something is off, that you are no longer fully present or fully honest in that space. And the longer you ignore it, the louder it becomes. This is where many people find themselves stuck, caught between the comfort of what's familiar and the truth of what's no longer right. Letting go feels like loss, but staying often feels like self-abandonment. And so the real question becomes, what are you willing to sacrifice to avoid an ending? Because every relationship you hold onto past its natural life cycle asks something of you. Sometimes it asks for your energy, sometimes your authenticity, and sometimes it asks for your growth. Recognizing that a relationship has reached its natural conclusion is not about assigning blame. It's about developing the awareness to see things as they are, rather than as you wish they would be. It's about understanding that people can be good, kind, meaningful, and still not meant to walk with you forever. And that insight, while painful, is also liberating. It allows you to honor what the relationship was without forcing it to become something it's not. It allows you to appreciate the connection without clinging to it. And most importantly, it allows you to continue evolving without being anchored to a version of yourself you've already outgrown. Because in the end, not every relationship is meant to last, but every meaningful relationship is meant to change you. And sometimes, the healthiest thing you can do is recognize when that change is complete, and have the if we accept that some relationships naturally reach their conclusion, then the next question becomes far more personal and far more difficult. What does it actually take to let go? Because understanding that something has ended is one thing. Acting on that understanding is something else entirely. Letting go is often framed as a passive experience, as if it's something that just happens over time. But in reality, letting go is an active, conscious decision. It requires you to override powerful emotional instincts, attachment, familiarity, even fear, and choose something less immediately comfortable but ultimately more honest. And this is where many people misinterpret what strength looks like. We tend to associate strength with endurance, with staying, with pushing through discomfort and proving our loyalty by not walking away. There's a kind of cultural narrative that tells us if we can just hold on long enough, things will eventually return to what they were. That persistence is always virtuous, but persistence in the absence of mutual growth isn't strength. It's resistance to reality. True emotional strength, as emphasized by thinkers like Brené Brown, is rooted in vulnerability and self-awareness. It's the ability to face uncomfortable truths without numbing them, without dressing them up, and without pretending they don't exist. And one of the most uncomfortable truths we encounter in relationships is this: sometimes staying costs more than leaving. That cost isn't always visible on the surface. From the outside, everything might look intact. The connection is still there. The communication still exists. The shared history remains untouched. But internally, something begins to shift. You start to feel drained rather than supported. Conversations feel heavier, not lighter. You notice a lack of reciprocity, a subtle imbalance where you are giving more than you are receiving emotionally, mentally, sometimes even physically. And over time, that imbalance doesn't just affect the relationship. It affects your sense of self, because every time you ignore your own needs to preserve a connection, you send yourself a message. You reinforce the idea that maintaining the relationship is more important than maintaining your integrity. And that's where the real damage occurs. Letting go in this context is not about rejecting the other person. It's about refusing to reject yourself. It's about recognizing that boundaries are not punishments. They are expressions of self-respect. When you decide that you can no longer continue in a dynamic that diminishes you, you are not being cold or ungrateful. You are being honest, and honesty, especially in relationships, is often disruptive. It disrupts expectations. It challenges the roles people have grown accustomed to playing. It forces both individuals to confront a version of reality they may have been avoiding. That's why letting go can feel so intense. It's not just an emotional shift, it's an identity shift. You are no longer the person who tolerates what hurts you. You are no longer the person who stays out of obligation or fear. You are someone who chooses alignment over attachment, and that choice requires courage, because there is always uncertainty on the other side of letting go. You don't always know what will replace the relationship. You don't always know how the other person will respond, or how long it will take for the emotional weight to lift. There is a period of ambiguity where things feel incomplete, unresolved. But that ambiguity is not a sign that you made the wrong decision. It's a natural part of transition. Psychologically, we are wired to seek closure, to tie things up neatly, to create narratives that make endings feel justified and understandable. But not all endings offer that kind of clarity. Sometimes the only certainty you have is how the relationship feels, and more importantly, how it makes you feel about yourself. And that is enough. There is also a deeper philosophical layer to this. Letting go challenges our attachment to control. We want relationships to follow predictable paths, to evolve in ways that align with our expectations. But relationships are dynamic systems, influenced by two independent individuals who are constantly changing. You cannot control that process. You can only respond to it, and sometimes the most authentic response is to step away. Not with resentment, not with bitterness, but with a quiet recognition that this connection, as it exists now, is no longer sustainable. That doesn't erase the value it once had. It doesn't invalidate the memories or the meaning. It simply acknowledges that something has shifted, and that honoring that shift is healthier than denying it. What's important to understand is that letting go creates space, not just externally in terms of new relationships or opportunities, but internally. It creates space for clarity, for self-reflection, for reconnecting with parts of yourself that may have been neglected. And in that space, something begins to rebuild. Your sense of worth becomes less dependent on external validation. Your decisions become more aligned with your values. You begin to trust yourself, not just in moments of certainty, but in moments of doubt. And that trust is the foundation of emotional resilience. So when we talk about relationships ending, we often focus on what is lost. But we rarely talk about what is reclaimed, your energy, your voice, your direction. Letting go is not the absence of love. It's the presence of discernment. It's the ability to say, this mattered, and because it mattered, I'm not going to force it into something it's no longer meant to be. And that perspective changes everything, because instead of seeing endings as failures, you begin to see them as transitions, as necessary adjustments in the ongoing process of becoming who you are. And the more you practice that kind of discernment, the more intentional your relationships become. You stop holding on out of fear, and you start choosing based on alignment, which leads to a different kind of connection altogether, one that is not built on obligation, but on mutual growth and respect. In the end, letting go is not about losing something important. It's about refusing to lose yourself in the process of holding on. And sometimes, the strongest decision you will ever make is the one that allows you to walk away with your integrity intact.